So in this module, we're going to talk about the way an archery range is laid out, so that when you go to a club, you understand how it's laid out, you understand the safety involved and any protocols or etiquette that clubs have. So if we start off by looking at the range, whether you're shooting outdoor or you're in a school hall or whatever, they're laid out in the same way. So if we have a look at what we've drawn out here, at one end you'll have your targets, and then there are two lines within this. So at the back of the hall or the back of the range, this is where you would generally mingle. You then have what's called the equipment line. Now when you arrive at the club, you're going to set up your bow. Once you've set your bow up, you put your equipment bags etc. to the back down here somewhere, and you would stand your bow on its stand side by side along what's called the equipment line. The next line is called the shoot line. So this is where you'll actually shoot from. You do not approach the shoot line unless you're going to shoot, in which case obviously you'll pick up your bow and you'll go to the shoot line. When you get to the shoot line, you actually stand astride this, so you'll have 1 foot over the line and 1 foot behind the line. So 1 foot here and 1 foot there, right? And then your distance from there to the targets, if you're shooting indoors or you're just starting with a club, will be 10 to 20 metres. If you're outdoors, you'll have people shooting up to 70 metres, and they'll have targets set at different distances for people of different competency, that's the word. But when you first go, you'll be shooting at the short range targets. So generally speaking, when you get to the club, you'll be allocated a target to shoot at, and that would be the target you would shoot at all night, unless you're going to change distances, in which case you would notify people that you're moving to another target. But if you're in a hall and they're all the same distance, once you've chosen a target to shoot at, the protocol is that you stay on that target, you don't jump from one to the other. That just annoys other people if you start doing that, because you don't know who's shooting at what target. There could already be 4 people shooting at this target and you're on this one and there's only 3 of you. So if you move to that, you've then got 5 and 2. So pick a target and stay there. Now not everybody, if you've got 4 people shooting at a target, you don't all shoot at it at the same time. You'd have a maximum of 2 people shooting at one time. So if the hall's busy and there's 4 of you on this, you would agree between yourself who are the first wave of shooters and who are the second wave of shooters. So on the whistle, and we'll come to whistles, when you get a whistle to commence shooting, the first set of players, shooters, would go up and they would stand either side of the line, and they'll shoot their 3 or 6 arrows, or whatever has been agreed as the maximum of arrows that you can shoot. Once they have finished, they step back, and then the next 2 sets of shooters will go up. Once everybody along the line has shot, there'll be a whistle signal, and again we'll come to that, to say that's the end of shooting. Everybody leaves their bow back on the equipment line, and everybody walks down to collect their arrows. So there are 2 main whistle signals in archery. The first whistle signal is basically to commence shooting, and that will be 1 blast on a whistle. The other one is 3 blasts, and that is to say that shooting has finished for that end. And by an end, what I mean is once everybody has shot their arrows for that time round, that's an end. So at the end of an end, there'll be 3 whistle blasts. Sometimes it's also accompanied by somebody shouting, "Collect arrows." At that point, as I said, everybody leaves their equipment back here, their bows back here, and walks down to collect arrows. And we'll look at how you safely do that in another module. There is one other command, and that command is fast. Now this is a safety command. If somebody sees something dangerous on the shooting line or even in the hall, then it's upon that person to shout fast. Now, anybody can shout fast because not everybody's looking in the same place at the same time. There could be somebody at one end of the hall has done something dangerous. The next person in the line sees that and they shout fast. If you hear someone shouting fast, you too shout fast, because the hall could be quite large. They could be over here and not have a very loud voice. If you're here and you hear that, you shout fast so that the person along from you here can also hear it, and they will shout fast, and so forth across the whole hall so that everybody hears it. It's a very, very important shout. If you hear it, I'll show you now what you should do. Okay, so I'm in the hall, I'm on the shooting line, and I could be preparing to shoot, I could be up at full draw. Okay, I hear someone shouting fast. Okay, so the first thing I do, I shout fast. If I'm up at full draw, I do not let go of the arrow. I come down slowly and I take the arrow out of the bow, I put it back in my quiver, and then I'm going to step back, put my bow on its stand and go and stand at the back of the hall. Once everyone's done this and whatever the danger or perceived danger has been sorted out, then there'll be a shout to resume shooting, or you'll hear one whistle blast again so that everybody can go back to what they were doing. But the main thing is, if you hear fast, shout fast, take your arrow out of your bow if you're on the shoot line, and go and stand by and wait till you're given the all clear. Okay, so just another point of etiquette. While people are shooting, you shouldn't be standing next to them talking. So if they're on the shoot line and you're on the shoot line, no talking. And equally so, if you're at the back of the hall, nobody should be shouting, you talk quietly amongst yourselves. Okay, so we're now going to assume that I've been up, I've shot my arrows, and we're now going to look at collecting your arrows safely. So we're indoors here. When you're shooting indoors, you have what's called the backstop net. So the net should hang so that it has a slight gap at the bottom of it. And this is so that the net works properly in terms of stopping arrows. However, sometimes you can have a misfire on an arrow and your arrow can slide underneath the net. So we're going to look at how you retrieve that safely and how you collect your other arrows. So the first thing is, when you're indoors, when you're walking up to the target, what you're going to find here is we have an arrow lying on the floor down here. This is commonly referred to as a bouncer. So it's hit the target and for whatever reason it has bounced off it, or it's hit the backstop net and it's come forward again. So the first thing is that we do not pick that arrow up first. You'll see here first of all that although these arrows are here, they can actually be quite difficult to spot, especially when you're looking at them end on. Now if I bend down at the moment to pick that arrow up and I stand up, there's a good chance that I'm going to catch my eye or my face or something on the arrows that are still stuck in the target. So the arrow that's on the ground, I'm going to leave it there until all the arrows have been collected from the target. Let's assume everybody has scored their arrows and we're now ready to pull them. Now in this range, my targets are actually fixed top and bottom, but if you're in a hall, generally speaking, the targets will be freestanding. They'll be sitting on a wooden H stand or a tripod stand, which means that you can just lift them on and off. So you want to avoid actually pulling the stand down on top of you. They will sit back at a slight angle, but you need to ensure that you're not taking any risks. So when you're pulling an arrow, you'll always put one hand on the target to hold it in place before you pull the arrow. And generally speaking, you'll have it in the V between your thumb and your forefinger. It's where you'll put the arrow that you're going to pull. I would also always advocate that you have one of these, which is an arrow puller. This has two functions. First of all, it gives you a better grip on the shaft of the arrow. The second thing is, if you're shooting, as these are, composite aluminium carbon arrows or carbon only arrows, these arrows can be damaged, and if the carbon is split and you pull it with a bare hand and you get a scalp or a splinter of carbon under your skin, you'll never get it back out again. Carbon will just keep splitting and splitting and splitting into micron sizes, so you never want to get carbon stuck under the skin of your hand. So I would say that you should always use one of these. Okay, so the other thing is that the target end of the range can be crowded. If there's several bosses or targets and you've got 4 people shooting at each one, you can have someone standing behind you. My targets are closer together, but the next target can only be 2-3 feet away. So if you've got people milling around there, you have to be very aware of where everybody else is when you're pulling an arrow. So the way not to pull an arrow, well, the first way you should do it is put your hand around it, grab the arrow with the arrow puller as close to the target as you can, and then you're going to pull it back out. But you want to pull it straight back out. Never pull it this way, because there could be somebody stood behind you, and these are as sharp at one end as they are the other, and if you catch somebody on the back of the head or even in the shoulder, this is sharp enough that it can pierce their skin or cause them quite a bad injury. So you have to always make sure that you're putting your hand around the arrow, grasping the arrow as close to the target as you can, and then pulling it straight back while looking over your shoulder to make sure that nobody's standing there, because one of your own people could be standing too close and get that right in the face. So always make sure you're looking what you're doing when you're pulling that arrow out. Okay, so I'll just pull these other 2. Okay, so I've still got the problem of my arrow on the ground, so now because there's no arrows here, I can actually bend down and pick that up safely. As for arrows that have actually slid along the floor and gone underneath the net, if you're going behind the net to retrieve that, you need to tell somebody that you're going in there. Generally speaking, there'll be like a meter between the net and the wall. So you'll have to probably go to the end of the net, walk round the back and get your arrow. So you need to tell somebody that's on your target, I'm going behind the net. What that person does is they will then stand in front of the target and they will wait for you to come back. Why? Right, you don't tell somebody you've gone behind the net. Everybody's got all their arrows and they all walk back down to that end of the hall. And then the whistle's blown for them to start shooting. Where are you? You're still behind the net. Or you're just emerging from behind the net when one of these comes whistling down the range. So you don't want that. So always ensure you make sure you tell somebody you're going behind the net. Get your arrow and be as quick as you can. So if you're shooting outdoors, as a footnote, if your arrow falls short of the target, it will generally sit in the ground at an angle, a bit like that, sticking out the ground. Now, as we've seen when we were walking down before, arrows are actually quite difficult to see when you're looking at them just end on, particularly as well when they've got black shafts. So if that's sticking out the ground, what you need to do, and you should do it indoors as well, is rather than walking straight at the target, is you walk to the side of the target. Also, you're checking the ground as you're approaching the target. You're making sure you're checking the ground to make sure there are no arrows sticking out. If they are and you don't see it, and again, you get that up your shin or in your leg, again, it is enough to cause you quite a sore injury. So again, just check for that. And as indoors, if you have arrows which have overshot, there could be bushes further back. Again, tell somebody that you're going to go and have a look for your arrow and make sure that everyone's aware that that's where you are so that they don't go back and start shooting again. Okay, so we talked briefly earlier about whistles. So there is a nominated person in the club who's called the line captain, and he's the one with the whistle. So he'll be the one, or she will be the one, who will be checking to make sure everybody's ready to shoot and will blow the whistle. They'll also be the one to blow the 3 whistle blasts so that people can go and collect their arrows. However, as I said before, anybody can shout fast, including the line captain, but it's everybody's responsibility to make sure of the safety in the range. So to conclude what we've covered, we've looked at the layout of the range, including the shoot line and the equipment line. When you would shoot, we've looked at whistle blasts, we've looked at the safety calls of fast, we've also looked at how to collect your arrows and when to collect your arrows and how to do it safely. And I hope that's been of help to you.